They know they're brilliant, but sometimes I've had several clients that they don't know how brilliant they are. And so they assume their employee is being lazy because it's so easy for them. So they need to also realize what is so easy for them. And maybe their employee really tried very hard, but they have different skill sets beginning in their journey or whatever. Often they're not very flexible in their leadership. They always have sort of one style of leadership for all situations. So they need to understand that different people need different types of leadership to make the relationship more productive.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another amazing episode of Lead to Greatness, where we believe in helping others reach their greatest potential and together change the world. Today on Lead to Greatness, we have Dr. Katrina Burrus. This is your first time joining us. Please consider subscribing and hit that notification bell and hit that like button. This will be greatly appreciated in helping getting out this content to great leaders and great individuals like yourself. Dr. Katrina is the CEO of Excellent Executive Coaching LLC and is known for fast-tracking inspiring leaders to the C-suite and for transforming brilliant jerks into inspiring leaders. She is a keynote speaker and author of Managing Brilliant Jerks and Global Leadership, a body of work used by Nestle. Dr. Katrina has 20 years of experience as the first master certified coach and founding board member from the International Coaching Federation in Switzerland. Please help me welcome Dr. Katrina with Managing Brilliant Jerks.
This is Cedric Francis, and you're listening to Lead to Greatness.
Okay, let's say somebody comes with a project they didn't achieve, and they come to their boss and say, look, I didn't make it. And so the toxic leader, they would attack the person and would leave the person feeling incompetent and not give them any tools to improve. So they're not only criticized personally in a negative form, but they don't know how to make it better. So they feel threatened because the failure of their employee, they think it will show upon themselves as a failure on them. And so they attack, they feel threatened and they attack. Now, an inspiring leader, they would come with the same issue. The employee would come and say, look, I didn't manage to do this. I tried to do this, but it failed. So what he would do is step back, not take it personally. It doesn't concern him.
Right.
It concerns that person. They don't talk and make it personal. They talk about the project and they give the tools to the person that they can succeed. Is the project too ambitious for that person, but the person really tried? So they reduce the project, or they give them a mentor, or they give them training. So that's more the type of the inspiring leader, is to put the system in place to make them succeed. And indirectly, they succeed too, because they can't do all the work. So, but they have that foresight to step back and analyze the situation. Is that person really incompetent to do it because they don't have the training? Or maybe they're not motivated. So they have leadership agility to change their leadership and say, okay, this person maybe is not motivated to do it. So they just don't want to do it. So then they have a different type of discussion and a different type of leadership. See, they still have that leadership agility to adapt to the person and the situation, because they're always focused on the other and not on themselves. Like, think of a 2-year-old, a 2-year-old, no, I don't want to. And they feel like the world rotates around themselves. And everything is, if someone leaves them, it's because of them. It's not because of a situation. They don't have that distance. So this is an exaggeration for adults, but it's a little, just to give you insight into that kind of situation.
Wow.
To be a thought leader, everything you do has to communicate the thought that you want to promote. And it's not just reacting to news, it's really taking an active part in any discussion on that thought leader. So let's say, and also the branding, like say Brilliant Jerks. So I want to highlight, I've written a book about Brilliant Jerks. I talk about Brilliant Jerks. I write about Brilliant Jerks. So there's a consistency and taking that subject from very many different angles. So that's one. It's also, yes, actively producing content and helping other peoples in that area. So that's I would say, one of the reasons to develop thought leadership. Now, you could say, okay, that's not thought leadership. Maybe it's an expertise. So then we need to define the difference between a thought leader and an expertise. A thought leader really is people come to you because they know you are an expert in that area and will call on you. You really move the market in an area. An expert is known for that area, but do they influence the thought of others? It's a slightly different angle. It's also a question of branding, having clear messages, like in my case, it would be transforming brilliant jerks into inspiring leaders. So it's very clear. And that should be also promoted through your brand. So there's branding, there's content creation, there's being active in different markets. It's being thought over as what is that person thinking on that subject. So these all together need to be reunited.
Right. Let's talk about what you do. What inspired you to begin the journey of coaching and why?
So I was in finance, believe it or not, with a well-known Swiss bank. And I was a financial analyst. And, financial analysts, what they do, they analyze companies and every different aspect, but they also you have to determine what trends are coming and see if a company is undervalued or overvalued. So I was traveling back and forth from the US to Switzerland, and I could see that coaching was something that was really developing in the US. And there's usually a lag time between something that's developed in the US compared to Switzerland and those kind of areas. So I said, I'll jump on the bandwagon. So I was the first master certified coach in Switzerland. And I was also a founding board member of the International Coaching Federation. Yeah, so I was a precursor. What's the advantage of being a precursor? The press loves you. And you have the press all over the place because, it's a new idea, it's different. And so I benefited from that. And then the other reason is that I was in finance. You know how the price over earnings determine a company. It's a one form of evaluations. And I was always very curious why companies would be better evaluated because of their good leadership. And so I decided that finance was not where I wanted to focus my time. I wanted to, help people more on the personal level instead of on their finances. And so I left the bank, but I was always fascinated with leaders. And so I went to different conferences to listen to them. And one day I sent a leader all my feedback, and he contacted me and hired me. And that's how I started my career. You have to dare, I guess. Too.
Wow. That's awesome. So you leave the bank and then you get into leadership. Someone gave you the opportunity and you got into leadership. So what happened from there?
So then, so when you're in the early part of the market, there's not much competition and there's not knowledge exactly when coaching was. Now, this was 2002. So people didn't really know it wasn't as widespread as today. That's 20 years ago. But the advantage, it's something new. And so I didn't have much competitors. And as it was a growing trend, as I knew as a financial answer to determine what was growing and what was not, I got hired by different companies like the Nestle's and Philip Morris's in Switzerland. And then one day, then the market matures and more companies were paying less for the same service and trying to form internally their coaches so they wouldn't have to pay somebody outside or a consultant, but would have internal coaches. I don't know about confidentiality, but anyway, that was less of their concern. It was more a cost issue. So, okay, now you're competing with more internal coaches. And then there's another trend that comes out is that there's more and more schools coming out forming coaches. So there's also newbies coming in and of course they want experience, so they do it at very low cost. So you have these two pressures coming in. So I don't know if you know the blue ocean and the red ocean. The blue ocean is where there's less competition, and the red ocean is where there's plenty of competition. So it was becoming awfully red, the ocean. And so I said, that's when I decided, when the market was really mature and there was more and more um, coaches that would do a weekend and were encouraged to say they were coaches. I said, okay, where do they not tread? And that's again with more difficult cases. And I had the experience, I had done a PhD, a master's in that area. So that's how I went there.
Wow. That is awesome. And I love this idea of the brilliant jerk. And you explained already, what's a brilliant jerk. I want to talk about what are the brilliant jerk's fears and what are their triggers?
So the brilliant jerk, which they fear that the failure of any of their employees will look badly upon themselves. And I'm going to generalize terribly, but some people like to be loved and some people like to be respected. For them, being respected is the most important, and they don't care if they're liked or not often. So one of my cases, for example, they would get triggered because they felt that their expertise or their status wasn't being recognized, and they were put in a small hotel and they should have been in the 5-star hotel, or they didn't get the corner office and they felt like, given their status, they should. So they lose it. Or they could be going to an appointment and being very nice with their colleagues, but then they see the big boss coming into the meeting and they destroy their friends. All this because they want to look good. And since they're very bright, they demolish their friend in front of the big boss. Why? They were their friends. They were just having lunch with them a minute before. It's because they could not miss the opportunity of shining in front of the big boss. This desire for recognition is all encompassing. And if you go a little further in their education, often it's that they absolutely needed that recognition and were only recognized when they did something or succeeded. And if they didn't succeed, they weren't practically loved. They felt it that way for sure.
Yeah.
So Cedric, I just want to say though, because we can be so stressed that we snap at our employee or whatever, that can happen to all of us, but that doesn't mean we're a brilliant jerk. It's when it's repetitive, it's manipulative, it's out of control, the person is triggered. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay. Thank you.
Some of the cost is tremendous on an individual. People get sick. One of the top executives that really was a senior executive, not a junior, called me and said, I don't know what's happening. I was one of the best speakers. And now people say I act weird. I can't finish my sentences. And all that became because of the stress from his boss and probably some personal issues that he was facing at the same time, combined that they lose it. So that's the stress. And he had really physical consequences to that stress. Absenteeism, because people don't want to go to work, lack of motivation. So that's on the individual. On teams won't speak up and say what the issue is because they fear that the messenger will be fired or shot. And that consequences is that the problems don't surface in a timely fashion to address it. So they become crises before they even surface. And that's terrible. People don't want to speak up. It could be that the brilliant jerk pits one person against the other. That's not conducive because it doesn't help collaboration. And what also can happen is that they bully one person so much and publicly and personally that the others don't dare do anything. Wow. So these are costs on a personal level, team level, and also on the organizational levels, absenteeism, turnover. But there's one that's often omitted, and that's because the mood. If someone it can be pretty toxic and they walk in and you can see they're angry and everything, everyone will react according to the mood of the boss and what's best for the company. So That's another cost that is often overlooked.
And I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about can stun the growth of the company. This thing can affect companies in a lot of ways. It's endless on how much this can cost, an organization as far as having a brilliant jerk or someone in this position, how bad it can be. How do we stop brilliant jerks from spreading throughout our organizations?
Oh, that's a good question, Cedric. There's a lot of things that we can look at for an organization, because if you work with a brilliant jerk and they change their behaviors and they go back to the organization, okay, so one is really known as tough, okay, and a little abrasive. And he comes to you, Cedric, and says, okay, Cedric, how's your weekend? How's your children? How's your wife? You say, oh my God, this person, what does he want from me? So you would probably reject the person. Well, when the person's undergoing leadership development, the environment needs to be aware that he's working on his leadership development, because it can be perceived by the mindset of his people very differently. If he says, he's working on himself, we'll schools of this kind of behavior. That's how they interpret the behavior. If they don't know, they'll push him back. And of course, all the effort he's doing, he says, oh, see, it doesn't work, or what she's doing. So so that has to be into place. But there's a lot of other things like leadership principles. What is accepted, what is condoned, should be clearly, stipulated. What is lack of ethics? But just having them on the board is not enough, because that will only create cynicism, because here they want, but they're not doing. So every big presentation to the whole company, these issues should be mentioned and appreciated and rewarded, because often people will do what is rewarded, or even financially. So there's leadership principles, having each time there's an end of year that it's mentioned. Also, when you start a team, have a chart of how they're going to behave together, not only what they're going to do, but how they're going to do it. And I had one team that they called me and they say, look, I have brilliant, and they were very brilliant experts. And together, nothing was done. He says, look, they're brilliant individually, but together we need to do a certain amount of projects and they won't work together. So he called me in, and I realized that what their amusement when someone proposed something was to criticize it and show off in front of their colleagues how smart they are, which they were. And so when they were made aware of that, and that by even play, because they were very playful, that each time they criticized without giving some constructive feedback of how to build it, they would have to put, $20 in a jar. Then so they began to use their fun nippiness into catching others not being constructive. And so that changed their mindset, and it really helped them at the end of the year to do something collaborative. So that's on the team basis. On the individual level, there should be evaluations of not only what they do, but how they do it, annually, biannually evaluated, and they should be evaluated by their employees. So, because if they're evaluated by employees, sometimes it's not justified, but even if it's not justified, it brings a conversation where they'll resolve issues of miscommunication, or have them be aware that they need to ask how they want to be led, what would be most helpful, what would make that relationship more productive. And so all these different things, and there's quite a few more that I have in my book, Managing Brilliant Jerks.
That is a knowledge bomb, because I love that, because getting evaluated by the employees, I think that is provides so much feedback, and the information that you get back, even if you don't use the information to change the process, you're using the information to at least know how the individual will feel. I mean, Zig Ziglar, one of my favorites, has this quote say, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I mean, it's really letting the employee know that we hear you, that we hear you. You have a voice and we hear you. And I think that's so Amazing. So yes, that is awesome. Any individual, whether they're listening today, nobody wants the title of a brilliant jerk, right? Nobody wants that title. So what I want you to do, I want you to, how do you transfer a brilliant jerk into an inspiring leader?
So I have a process.
Mhm.
I also explain in my book, Managing Brilliant Jerks,
Mhm.
but I'll give you a nutshell of it. It's
Okay.
really starting by making them more aware.
Mm.
Uh, they know they're brilliant, but sometimes I've had several clients that they don't know how brilliant they are.
Mm.
And so they assume their employee is being lazy because it's so easy for them.
Mm.
So they need to also realize what is so easy for them. And maybe their employee really tried very hard, but they have different skill sets beginning in their journey or whatever. Often they're not very flexible in their leadership. They always have sort of one style of leadership for all situations. So they need to understand that different people need different types of leadership to make the relationship more productive. So it's a huge amount of self-awareness that they do, which I do with a series of psychometric inventories. And then the second step is boss awareness. Why boss awareness? Because usually they're pretty interested in knowing what the boss thinks of them, really. We use what they acquired, like knowledge about themselves, how they make decisions, how they're creative, how they communicate. And then we ask them to analyze their boss, how they make decisions, what is important to them, what's their values, what's their ambitions. And I have on my website a little exercise that is helpful to prepare those interactions with somebody, which is, what are they thinking? Where do they want to go? What is their passions inside and outside of the office? What are they doing with their arms, meaning symbolized by their arms? Where do they want to go, symbolized by their legs? What are they fearful? Because people fear certain things on their gut. So this is a simple exercise, but if you spend time to step back and really go at deeper levels to analyze the other person. And so I have them do that with their boss because they're motivated usually. And then if I can, I have the boss do their psychometric inventory, how they decide what their leadership style is. And then we have a discussion. Then I help them on a team basis, how they interact with the team, so that what kind of leadership, when do they increase their credibility and when do they lose their credibility with their team. Now I do a lot of, not a 360-degree feedback, although that can be very useful for non-brilliant jerks. I do interviews all around the company and bring factual, real feedback in a very precise way to the brilliant jerk, how they're perceived and what are they doing to give a certain perception. And as they're very bright, when they get this information, it's so specific that they know exactly what to do to change that perception. And so then we work on a 6 months to 9 month basis, or sometimes even shorter, of how to acquire new behaviors. And each time they're triggered, because it's never a progression like this in a straight line, it goes up and down. They might feel triggered. So that's there's a lot of self-awareness. So after I give them that feedback, usually they're convinced to do something because they're high achievers. And so when they see they are not good at some area, often they're highly motivated to change it. And then it's helping them change and trying out new behaviors and new ways of communication. Because initially they fear that if they're too nice, they won't get the results they want.
You said something, you used the word convince. I feel like this can be a very sensitive for an individual that's doing this and, really trying to do a great job in what they do. How can you convince a brilliant jerk to be coached? And what should we avoid?
So let's take a case, a brilliant cardiologist, and the hospital searched maybe 2 years to get this brilliant cardiologist to their hospital. And then they find out that no nurse really likes to work with him. They make mistakes because they're emotionally aggressed. There's been a few difficult moments. So usually if this happens and there's a lot of cost, somebody is going to tell the brilliant jerk, look, you are brilliant, but there's so many people leaving the hospital. The nurses are not wanting to stay and work with you. And he says, well, or she says, good for them. They weren't competent. They were lazy.
Right.
So we're better off without them. But you can offer them and say, okay, maybe that's the case, but would you be open to having someone give you and only you feedback about your leadership, and you decide if you want to do a coaching or not? You see, you let them have the power, because they don't like to release power. So you give them the power and the decision-making power. But that irrefutable data is really a turning point, because then they see, without identifying material, it has to be done very carefully, because you can imagine if a brilliant jerk finds out so-and-so said that. So it's got to be very well done and professionally done. And then they say, okay, then they're convinced. I mean, I haven't had one that has not been convinced. And they also have a moment where they think it's not possible to change. So that's very anxiety provoking. So if the feedback is also very detailed oriented, and enough to be detailed, but not too much to be clear who said what, and give them the encouragement that they can change, and show them and help them change.
I love it.
They want to work on themselves, but I'll say that especially when you give them back the data, not in the beginning. At the beginning, they might wish to swat you like a fly, because they say, who's this person that is not doing the revenue that I'm doing, and I'm the expert, and they're trying to make me soft and fuzzy, and what do they know about business? That could be the mind frame when you meet them first. So it's not trying to convince them. It's not trying to tell them how bad they are. Just say, look, this is what I'm hearing. I even asked them, why do you think I'm here? But I asked before if the boss has talked to them, and sometimes they don't know.
Wow.
So I usually ask the person that is hiring me, or sponsor, or the boss especially, to please communicate why.
Gotcha.
But since you might have a boss that's an avoidant leader, an abrasive leader underneath, they say it, but they don't really say it in any clear form. So they tell me, oh yeah, I've talked to him. He knows. So I go in and I ask her, so what did you understand? Why I'm here? Oh, I don't know. So I said, well, I was hired by so-and-so to talk to you. Would you like that we have all three of us come to the reunion? No, don't want to. Okay, no problem. So I always let them do the decision. And so then I talked to the boss. He didn't understand what you were telling him. I mean, it can happen. I make sure that something's been said enough.
Constantly echoing this during the interview, and you're basically saying allowing them to make the decision. And I think that is brilliant for anyone, whether we consider them a brilliant jerk or just anyone in the organization, and letting them make that decision. So man, that is awesome information for the Lead to Greatness community. And we're definitely going to be better because of it.
So the advice is to download this exercise that's called developing your EQ and adding it to your IQ. That's on my website, excellentexecutivecoaching.com. That is a good exercise to take 10-15 minutes before any meeting, and seeing how much you can fill it in. And then even though you can't fill it all in because you don't know that person that well, when the person comes in, you will be asking enough questions to really get to know that person better, to be able to get all those different areas. And so you'll be asking more questions, and that will help you understand where that person's coming from. And if you know where that person's coming from, you can orient your discussion to really customize to that person, and to be understood, and to have a better and deeper level of communication. So I think that that's very important. The other thing I would say is that if you're a CEO of a company, it's good to be part of a mastermind. What I've noticed with my clients is that I worked with them on an individual level. So it's on communication, it's on leadership. It's on how to be inspiring and engaging their employees. But at the same time, I encourage them to be part of a mastermind with similar CEOs in non-competing areas, because it's lonesome at the top. And sometimes you're at a loss of, what to do, how to do it. Of course, a coach will help. But when it's mergers and acquisition, I'm not an expert in mergers and acquisition. Of course, I've had experience, but other CEOs have. And to have this community of network of people that can share their experience, not tell somebody what they should do, but share it so that that person can really integrate and adapt it to their situation, I think really helps the leader develop at a faster rate, feel less lonesome and get good ideas. And I think that combined with coaching is really powerful. At least I've seen it with my clients. And Cedric, you and I have something very much in common. We're podcasters.
Yes.
And so we love to share, we love to learn,
Yes.
and we love to share our learning. So
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your podcast.
So my podcast is called Excellent Executive Coaching. So it's the same as my company.
Yes.
And I interview experts to share for entrepreneurs, coaches, and leaders. And I'm so excited. Cedric, I'm starting a new podcast. See, I really have the bug of the podcast.
Yes.
It's going to call Excellent International Executive.
Wow.
And so that would be executives of international businesses.
Awesome. Do you have a launch date for that yet?
I think it's probably will be end of March. Yeah.
Okay. Well, congratulations. Talk a little bit about your book. I want to talk about that as well before we go.
So it's called Managing Brilliant Jerks. So it talks about different cases, and I would say it's a one case that goes throughout the book, and it shows how my process, what to be careful about, what not to do, even in the 360-degree feedback interviews, what to be careful of. So it's going to come out in Audible next month.
So let me ask you this question. How did you come up with the name of Brilliant Jerks?
Well, I used to say toxic leader, abrasive leader, and I was looking for a name. Toxic leader is very negative. And I said, abrasive leader as well. You only focus on the negative. And one day I was at a conference and I stood up to ask a question, and you had to introduce yourself. And I said, I'm Dr. Katrina Burrus, and I coach brilliant jerks. And the room stayed silent.
Oh my goodness.
So I said, okay. And I love it because they are brilliant, because they wouldn't even stay there. So it's like the yin and the yang, their brilliance and their jerks. They have both elements in them, not just the negative. And that's why I like these brilliant people can become even inspiring and further engage people, because a leader needs to engage his employees. And especially with Zoom and working at home, one false communication can demotivate somebody for next 2 weeks, accentuate their brilliance. And in my feedback, I always make sure that they know what their brilliance is and how they're perceived as brilliant, so they can leverage that and also work on what is deterring their career to move forward.
It's the greatness. You've heard it. Dr. Katrina.
I do love your name, Cedric.
Thank you.
Cedric in French.
Yes. Awesome. On behalf of the Lead to Greatness community, we want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us all.
Thank you, Cedric. It's a real pleasure. You're so charming. Thank you.
Thank you. And don't forget to subscribe to Lead to Greatness if this is your first time. And if this podcast was helpful to you, leave a big thumbs up. And also, I want you to check out our Marriage Coach podcast, the podcast with my wife and I. If you're on iTunes, please rate this podcast and leave a review and help get the word out. Again, thank you, Lead to Greatness Nation, for joining us on today. Looking forward to seeing you again on next week. Till then, remember, if you help others reach their greatest potential, together we can change the world. Peace. We out.